All right, people, it's the finale, sort of. We are back with our final episode of Talkin' Lost that we are recording for the calendar year of 2024. After this, we'll be taking a small break next week. We'll be back in 2025 in order to wrap up the rest of season 1. But in the meantime, Luke, I told you this was going to be an important episode, and here we are. Not only is this an important episode, I would argue this is easily my favorite episode of the season and possibly the best episode of the entire show. Yeah, that's right. We may have front-loaded ourselves way before we get into seasons 3 and 4, which is when I would say we have some other contenders for the best episode. But now that you've finally seen the numbers, 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42, what are your thoughts before we get into this episode?
Well, I think you were hyping this episode up all season, and this is kind of the Lost that I expected going into the show. Just like
Right.
mysterious connections, like, ooh, what's this? How does it connect? Did the writers just throw it in and think, okay, we'll figure it out later? Just put it in there for now. But yeah, this was a banger of an episode. It had me going, oh, so that goes there, and that went there. So now it's even more intriguing.
Exactly. Will any of those questions be answered? As is the eternal question of Lost. All of that and more on today's episode of Talkin' Lost. I'm still amazed that we've done 17 episodes and we still haven't gotten one copyright strike for using the actual Lost sound effects for the opening title credits. That's pretty amazing. But Luke, we're here. We made it. Our official, I guess you could call it mid-season finale. I don't even know where that would count anymore because we're only taking a week off before we come back and wrap the final 5 episodes. But like I said, man, I've been hyping this episode up all season since we started. This is one of those Lost episodes where, again, when you're looking back at the entirety of the canon of Lost, this is one of the most important episodes. Not only is it important, though, it helps that it's a great episode. But not only is it just a great episode, it's great not for the reasons that made like the last 2 weeks, like Outlaws and In Translation, great, where it's just a supremely well-written episode of television that happens to be set in Lost. This is, like you were saying, this is the Lost that people came to know and fall in love with. You got a little bit of island mystery, overhanging plot threads, filling in the gaps as far as where things go, and an impeccable character backstory and drama episode. Again, this is the type of writing style and character journeys and stuff that Lindelof would continue on and really implement, I think, very strongly in his 2 follow-up shows, Leftovers and Watchmen. We finally get our Hurley focus episode again. It's kind of funny how, again, Hurley, we know Hurley's one of the most important characters in the canon of Lost. He easily won people over as being like a fan favorite alongside Charlie. He's one of the most important characters in the canon of Lost, one of the few characters that makes it all the way to the end. But up until this point, he was really just, kind of, for lack of a better word, the fat, funny friend who was trying to keep everybody happy while everybody else was going nuts and losing their minds. And this is the episode where we finally get some backstory on him. Not only is it, like, a lot of more island lore, but we end up getting, I would argue, one of the best catharses of any character, because I feel like unlike a lot of these other characters who are going through these very heavy, weighty, existential crises, daddy issues, on the run, criminals, pregnancy, drug addiction, and Hurley's just a guy who's just, looking to do the right thing at the end of the day. And it's just, and like he says, he's just stricken with incredibly, incredibly bad luck. Like, some of the worst luck that you could possibly imagine. And like I said, as we've discovered in every episode, it all ties back to this goddamn island. Luke, going into this episode, obviously, like I said, hype is an easy way, I've learned in the digital age, to ruin something easily. Did that possibly detract from your enjoyment of this episode as you started it?
It did not, because as is with Lost, I really have no idea what to expect. I knew there were the numbers were maybe I knew there was numbers and a bunker of some sort, and maybe it was a hatch or whatever before going into Lost. And I think it was from Fortnite that they referenced it in something, but whatever. I knew about the numbers, but I didn't know what they mean. I still don't know what they mean. Maybe I'll never find out what they mean. I don't know. But yeah, the hype definitely did not ruin it. Hurley, this is our first flashback of Hurley. We've had some double flashbacks. the first one with Hurley, and he kind of reminds me of one Samuel Tarley. Like, he's at the beginning, he's maybe you're not taking him too seriously as a character. He's kind of a comic relief, but as you slight spoiler, it's not really a spoiler. Like, he makes it all the way to the end and is one of the more important characters by the end, just like Sam in Game of Thrones. So, and yeah, just seeing his backstory and how his journey is the most linked to the island so far, from what we've seen. So, and like you mentioned, the catharsis at the end, which was a great moment.
Yeah, it really, really was. Again, it's Lindelof has this amazing ability, and I think that it was probably the best exemplified. Like, obviously, again, I'd watched Lost already, but that was more so just to, like, kind of, crunch it in and get it done. Watchmen was really the first instance where I was like, okay, this is what Lindelof is really capable of as a writer, and this is what he's like when he really can cook. But I think the best that he ever did with this sort of writing style is in season 3 of The Leftovers, the midway point. It's an episode called It's a Matt World, where every season of The Leftovers, he would have this one solo focus episode on the character of Matt Jameson, portrayed by Christopher Eccleston, who's a preacher character who is constantly trying to grapple with his faith in the wake of the Great Departure. And all of his solo episodes, to me, have been some of the best of The Leftovers, but the reason why it's a Matt World stands out really particularly well, besides just being Matt's final catharsis and his kind of way of finally letting go of the trauma, the residual trauma from the Great Departure, is the entire episode, he's obsessing over having to get Kevin back from Australia and, needing to make sure that things are all set and ready to go for the 7th anniversary of the departure. And by the end, after having a literal conversation with somebody who the show is very strongly hinting to be God, not the first time that that Lindelof has put a God/Jesus figure insert into the show, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, as far as potential for the future of Lost, but also, it's after having this conversation and realizing that, and essentially getting the answers that he always wanted, but just not in the way that he was expecting to, he finally is kind of able to move on with his life. And he's finally able to kind of, this great burden that he's been carrying around with him, he's finally able to let go. And while it's not done exactly the same way in this episode, that's part of what makes this episode so good, is, again, Hurley is this character who, up until this point, we really have not known that much about, other than the fact that he seems to be the one guy that's trying to keep everybody, like, sane and stable, He's always the guy that's bringing everybody back down to earth. He's got this really incredible moment later on where he's asking where Charlie is later on in the season. All Lost heads know what I'm talking about. And I guess it's this great kind of juxtaposition of he's such this massive figure, because he is such a big guy, but he has, again, just this lovable soul to him. And he really, again, he doesn't have anything bad to say about anybody. He has this really affable way of, getting to know even the most, like, kind of hardened of figures. He's able to negotiate with Sawyer for that one thing that he was trying to get for him a couple episodes ago. And this is the episode where, again, everything kind of comes full circle of how, of all the characters that were destined to be on the island, I feel like we could have made the biggest argument for Locke and Claire before this, but now after this episode, it's like, oh, Hurley easily was the one, He was the one that heard about the numbers. He was the one who was having all of this bad luck inextricably linked to him. He was the one who arguably came the closest to finding out about what the island was before he got to the island. Also, again, whereas with other characters, it's taken, like, multiple episodes to get into their backstories and kind of the reasoning as to what brings them to the island. Hurley, they're able to do it all in one, which is pretty rare, I feel like, as far as that goes, where with his backstory, his whole thing is, essentially, in order to get into it, he essentially was, kind of, not down on his luck, but, like, kind of, the classic millennial struggle, still late 20s, early 30s, still living with his mom, working at a low-income job, when he inexplicably wins the lottery out of nowhere.
And not just the lottery, the whole jackpot.
Yeah, the whole jackpot, the Mega Millions jackpot, like, becomes, like, a multi-millionaire overnight. And that's, of course, when everything bad starts happening to him, like a string of really bad events. His grandpa has a heart attack and dies out of nowhere. He buys his mom a new house that inextricably goes up in flames. His mom breaks her ankle when he tries to show it to her. He's arrested after he's mistaken for a drug dealer when he's consulting with his business manager. A guy jumps out the window. Like, just all of these really bad things that seem to be happening to him. And it caused him to kind of go and back to the source and realize that the numbers that he used to win the lottery, which we dropped at the beginning, he realizes that it's the numbers that are cursed, not the money. Because basically he remembers that he got the numbers from a friend of his that he met when he was spending time in a mental asylum. And his friend, I don't remember Leonard, I think his name was, his friend that was in the mental asylum, reveals that he was stationed while he was in the army off the coast of Australia, and him and another friend of his, Sam Toomey, were listening to radio broadcasts when they heard the numbers being transmitted, which leads Hurley to travel to Australia to find Sam Toomey, discovers that Sam Toomey is passed, but discusses things with his widow, and his widow reveals that the same thing happened to Sam when he heard the numbers, where all this bad luck started happening to him, and the only way that he was able to resolve it was he put a shotgun in his mouth and killed himself. And all of that is kind of tied to Hurley now, where, you know, when they're when they're talking with Saeed about, you know, about his interactions with Russo, Hurley discovers a slip of paper with those same numbers on it, and he's like, oh no, they're back to haunt me. And basically it sends him on this wild path. He goes into the jungle in order to try and consult Russo, try and figure out where the hell she got the numbers from. Jack, Saeed, and Charlie are going after him, being like, yo, Hurley, what's going on? You're acting so uncharacteristically. And again, it again shows the power of loss, the power of how strong this writing is, where again, the minute that Hurley seems to be like, want to take some agency and want to go off into the jungle and do something on his own, that's when everybody is like, okay, what's going on? Like, you're acting like uncharacteristic. When the truth and the reality of it is, yeah, okay, you could make that argument as far as him lying to Saeed and him acting weird, but like, he's not really. If you could make the argument,
I guess he's taking initiative, because even at the end to Rousseau, he's like, I'm the only one who's like worried about the smoke monster or whatever.
Right. He
mentions that, like, everyone kind of seems to be relaxed, and he's trying to take action. One more thing I wanted to mention, like did you already mention the broadcast, the numbers?
Yeah, how they heard the numbers over the broadcast.
So I guess that's kind of the first real evidence that the island is real, and it's not like in anyone's like mind or anything.
Yes,
that there is actually something going out of the island into the real world. So
exactly,
just that.
Exactly.
So I'm sure that put a lot of theories to rest in 2004.
Exactly. Well, put a lot of theories to rest, but also open up a whole new bag of theories, because you're so right. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because again, that's 100% correct, because again, the number one theory that Lindelof and Cuse were constantly battling from the Lost Heads as the years went on, as they kept going with the seasons, is everyone was like, oh, they're all dead, and this island is just purgatory. And they strictly said, they're like, no, everything that is on the island is happening is real. That was the thing they always said. And this, you're right, is the first bit of evidence that shows, no, everything that happened on this island actually happened. Because as you see, not just in this episode, but later on, this is the first instance, like I said, I always harp on these episodes when they introduce like a piece of lost lore. Like I said, when Locke and Boone first found the bunker, the first mention of the others with Russo, once Russo was first introduced, now the numbers, and she also mentioned the Black Rock, which is another bit of lost lore that's integral. Every time there's a bit of lost lore that is established, it is integral, because again, this is the thing that I was saying from the beginning. Lost is a binge show that was released in the network era. If you binge all of it, you pretty much get all the answers to everything. But watching it on a week-to-week basis, again, with years in between, because again, it was running on a network schedule, there were going to be some things that were missed. So when everybody was complaining about them not answering any of the mysteries, not necessarily true. It was just, again, it was laced in and written in so well, you had to be paying attention. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, Luke, because you're right. This is the first instance that shows, no, these survivors are not the first people to have had any interaction with the island. The island has been a presence in other people's lives before, and this is the first time that we see it. And it will not be the last time either that you see a transmission from the island get picked up out in the real world, you know? And that's going to come back later on in the show. especially once we start to get into the lore and the history of the island, once we realize that Oceanic Flight 815 is not the first plane to have landed there. It's also not the first group of people that have made it there. Obviously, we know about Russo's group, but there have been other groups before Russo as well. All of those things, they all come into play. They're all very important as far as the mythos of Lost. So, but bringing it back to Hurley for a second there, like you said, it's the fact that it's the first time that he's taken some agency. It's the fact that it's the first time that he's arguably, kind of his, for lack of a better word, one of the interesting things that we talked about as well in the history is how coming to the island was the worst moment for everybody except for Locke. For Locke, it was the best one because he regained something that he'd lost in the real world, which is why he's become such this staunch defender and believer of the island, establishing the whole man of science, man of faith mythos, conflict between him and Jack. But this is the first instance where you realize, at least up until this point, you're like, oh, it was kind of great for Hurley because Hurley was finally kind of able to escape this, for lack of a better word, curse that he thought he had been afflicted with, And this is also something that's quite interesting because taking aside the whole mythological, supernatural aspect of it, this is also just a real world aspect that you find a lot of people, find themselves in that same position in the real world of Hurley's, people who, again, can't seem to get a break, are always seem to be one step behind, can't seem to get the agency in the real world that they so desperately crave, and so they're kind of relegated to these kind of secondary positions while always wanting more. And the island kind of freed him of that, and that could again partly be the explanation as to why he was the way he was up until the numbers make their reappearance, and all of a sudden he's reminded of all the awful things that he had to experience in the real world. And so all of that is very, very interesting as far as just how that adds more to his character. And in addition,
and it just kind of brings back to why everyone is on the island for whatever reason they are. Like you kind of mentioned this at the start. It's not really about what the island is, what everything means. It's about the characters, why they're there, the journey that they go through, and this episode is really showing me. And I really enjoyed the kind of line between sci-fi and fantasy where it kind of enters that mythological. I guess it's kind of like the bridge between the two, where it's a curse, but there's sort of numbers involved, but you don't really know what's going on, and they show up just out of the blue on the island. Right. So you're, oh no, this is real. And then he gets the affirmation with Rousseau at the end, right. Of course.
There is an explanation, just not one that's directly laid out and spelled out like a typical network TV show for you. Like I said, again, it's one of those things where, again, if Lost had been an HBO show and only been 12 to 13 episodes per season instead of a network show with 20 plus episodes a season, it would have been hailed as one of the greatest shows of all time. It would have been up there with Sopranos and The Wire and Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. It would have been up there versus now, like I said, rather it's having kind of that, for lack of a better word, that 20-year turnaround that we were talking about a couple weeks ago as well, where, again, all the things from 20 years ago that we grew up with that were critically bashed for years on end by critics of old, that now that we are kind of coming of age, we're starting to see like the critical turnaround. Like I said, the Star Wars prequels, to name one. Man of Steel is another one. There's a couple other things that I listed up before, and this is another one where people are coming around and realizing, oh, no, this is actually great. Like, again, people just missed the mark because they weren't paying attention. And
Michael Bay movies. We gotta get that on the list.
There you go. Oh, that's already on the list. Trust me, that's already on the list. But
I'll hear Lost brought up, and I'll just listen to some podcast, and I see Lost brought up. I'm like, oh, skip. Yep. I don't want to hear anything.
Exactly, because again, it's all these people who have all this history with it. But this is why I'm so happy that I'm recapping the show with you of all people, because not only are you the perfect candidate, that's another piece of Lost lore that's going to come up, but not until the last season, for as far as for why you would love Lost, just based on how I've gotten to know you and your tastes and the things that you appreciate and acclimate towards. But you're also the perfect person because of not only the age that you are and the generation within which that you grew up. So you're the perfect person to really have this deep-seated appreciation for Lost that I feel like a couple of other people wouldn't, again, just talking to somebody that's my dad's age or somebody, their explanation every time is they're like, oh, Lost, it was so weird and stupid and slow, I didn't know what was going on, all that, versus us, who are kind of acclimated and trained by the media generation within which we grew up to look for all those tiny bits and pieces of clues, to go for potentially the deeper meanings, to look at potentially little moments that are kind of looked over and be like, oh, was that actually important? That's kind of why Again, you are the perfect person to be watching
And
this
I've
show.
seen all the Lost ripoffs.
That too.
Of course.
That too.
Without actually having seen Lost, which is great.
Right. And now you're seeing like where all those got ripped off from, and you're like, oh, now I see why all those are so much worse than Lost is. But yeah, there is also a quick little subplot where Locke is having Claire help him build a crib for baby Aaron, and that's nice and sweet. But that's kind of just like, you know, just there. That's like a nice little subplot. But obviously, again, it is kind of funny, and again shows the power of Hurley as a character when, again, after being told the entire episode by Jack, by Saeed, by Charlie, that, you know, you're acting weird, you're acting, you know, strange, what's going on here? Why don't you tell us what's going on? And, you know, Jack and Locke discover Russo's base, which he then sets to blow up, which is hilarious. That's just a good little piece of what's it called?
Good special effects, though.
Very good special effects. Well, because that's practical. That's why.
Well, it is practical, but for Lost's
Yes.
sake, what we're used to. It's
again,
nice
as time goes on, again, it becomes very apparent which effects are practical and which effects are CGI, because the CGI, oh man, even late 2000s
2004
network
and
TV.
TV.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But again, Hurley finally runs into Russo, who's taking shots at them. He's like literally demanding her. He's like, I need to know about these numbers because these things made my life hell in the real world, and I need to, and they clearly originated from this island somehow based off of what I've learned. So you need to tell me. It's like I've been the happy-go-lucky guy up to this point, and now it's time for some friggin' answers. And you can see, I don't know, it's so weird because, again, total opposite personalities. Again, somebody who has been, you know, with Russo, who has been on this island for years, to the point where, again, she's kind of developed this like survivalist mentality, and it's made it very hard for her to, you know, bring in and become warm to new people. But there's almost like this kindred sense that's developed between her and Hurley, where kind of they're both these figures that have suffered an unbearable amount of tragedy in their lives because of this island and because of these numbers specifically, because again, she also lost her entire team, as she reveals to Hurley, through these numbers, because they went to investigate the source of the transmission, where the numbers were coming from, and that's when all of her team got sick, as she says, and died, and then she reset the transmission, which is why the numbers stopped being broadcast to the outside world. So yeah, and finally when she tells Hurley, she's like, finally someone believes me and listens to me. And it's, again, it's so good because, again, you're being trained this entire episode to think the numbers, but that's not at all what this episode was about. They were nothing but a plot device at the end of the day. Now, whether they are a plot device for the entirety of the show, that's a different story. But at least up until this point, again, they were just a plot device in order to allow Hurley to overcome his insecurities and finally actually be listened to by somebody who believes him. Versus, again, and it kind of casts a different light on the rest of the survivors up until this point, because up until this point, you realize even Charlie, who is somebody who, again, you would consider to be very good friends with Hurley, not necessarily taking him seriously the way that he wants to, you know? And as he even tells Charlie at the end, when he tells him his net worth, he's like, okay, in the real world, I'm worth $156 million. And Charlie thinks he's just fucking with him and lying and telling jokes. And he's like, wow, this is what happens when I'm genuine with people. They think I'm lying, and they think I'm pulling their leg. And it's, again, that is so relatable to so many different people. I don't know if you've ever felt that. I've certainly felt that in my life a lot of time, where it's like, I'm telling you the God's honest truth, but you still don't believe me, you know? And it just creates this major sort of insecurity, and this insecurity complex that people have, where they feel the need to kind of be overly sharing, overcompensating for certain things. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant how that's shown here.
I just want to mention great Sawyer moment where he's trying to read his book, and then he's like, help build the boat, and he's like, throws the book away. You always need one great Sawyer.
Yeah, you always need one great Sawyer moment. Yeah, Michael, once again, you check in and see that Michael and Jin and them are continuing construction on the raft. So that's kind of continuing on. We'll see obviously how that goes once we check in with the final 5 episodes. But like I said, Luke, this is our final episode of the year for 2024. We're going to come back in 2025, which is only in 2 weeks. But man, what a year it has been, you know, from the start of the year to recapping 2023, which was such a great year, to kind of the rude awakening of how the strikes had really affected all the content, to the summer, to kicking off Lost and the journey that we've been. Man, how's the journey been for you so far up to this point? Now that we're almost done with season 1, we only have 5 episodes left.
Well, it's been an absolute blast. It's always been one of those shows that like I'm gonna watch eventually, but I just never had like a real reason to. Always seem to have something else to watch, but this has given me uh, a real purpose, if you will, as John Locke would might say, his purpose on the island. I'm really enjoying my time with it. Even though I know people don't love the ending, I'm on a mission to find out what the ending's all about. Maybe it's not as bad as everyone says. Maybe there's some meaning in it that has been lost in translation, and we're gonna figure it out.
Yeah, I can say immediately right off the bat that the ending is not nearly as bad as everybody says it is, because I will say right now that everybody's problems with the ending comes down to the final season, really the final couple of seasons, not just the final season when the show, I would argue, kind of went full sci-fi. And again, I understand some of the criticism because, again, it kind of jumped a little bit. The jump from season 3 to 4, once the episode counts got shorter, and it went kind of towards plot first, character second, you know, and there weren't as many of those juicy little character moments. I feel like that kind of made people fall in love with it in the first place. But like I said, we'll get to that once we get to that. Like I said,
I'm still waiting for those bodies in the cave to show up again.
Yep.
I'm telling you, it's them in the future or something. I'm sticking by that.
You're gonna see. You are going to see is all that I will say to that. But so, Luke, with that being said, there were a couple of movies that have come out, but for the most part, this has been, I would say, the worst December in recent memory. So I'm saving that until next week. I'm gonna cover Nosferatu and the Complete Unknown with Nathaniel, and that's gonna be our finale that wraps 2024. But there was a certain teaser trailer that dropped this past week. That, needless to say, the internet and everybody and their mother was ready for. You know, 2 years ago, when James Gunn dropped his Guardians of the Galaxy 3 teaser for, for kind of his goodbye to Marvel, the internet went nuts. And now we had the first teaser for the first movie in James Gunn's rebooted DC universe for Superman. And I think it's safe to say that the disruption that this caused, not just to the virtual space, but to the real space, was so crazy, because literally they were reported like multiple work stoppages because like the world just stopped like in unison to stop and cover this trailer. I woke up at 7 a.m. just so that I could watch it when the teaser first dropped that day and then record my reaction and put it up. So my thoughts are out there. They're online. For anybody who wants to see it, for anybody who has seen it already. But I just wanted your thoughts so far on the teaser and kind of what this is going to be. What do you think this spells out for the future of DC in live action? You know, James Gunn's Creature Commandos is currently airing right now on Max, and I am having an absolute blast with that. But that's the
Free
Gunn
Weasel.
Free Weasel, yes. But that's the James Gunn that we're used to. We've seen Gunn do that many, many times before with the Guardians of the Galaxy, with the Suicide Squad, to a certain extent with Peacemaker. But this is something different. This is something that we haven't really seen from him before. You know, this is Superman, one of the most, if not the most iconic superhero of all time. Arguably the first superhero, if you will. So what were your thoughts on the teaser? Needless to say, there was a lot of hype and anticipation going into this.
You know, when you followed a movie like this so closely since its announcement, even before its announcement, just seeing footage from it is so surreal. It's like when I saw the first trailer for Mission Impossible 7, I'm like, oh my God, it's been delayed 19 times and I'm finally seeing footage from it. I so badly want this movie to be good as a DC fan, as a James Gunn fan, as a fan of the superhero genre, which has been, everyone knows we've been struggling the last few years. And I really enjoyed the trailer. Everyone seems to be complaining about the colors. I'm saying, look at the Suicide Squad. It looks exactly the same. So, and it'll be fine. Like you'll watch it, you'll forget all about it.
Exactly. You will believe that a man can fly again. But yeah, my thoughts on it, as far as just to the complainers and the haters, were I'm like, yeah, James Gunn hasn't made a bad movie. Like, sure, you can disagree with his style. Like, if you don't like James Gunn's styles and sensibility and his sense of humor, okay, that's one thing. If you feel like he's repetitive, okay. But my two counters to that are, A, you can't really say that any of his movies have been straight up bad. Like, none of his movies that he's directed have been straight up bad. You know, like really, and anybody who says that, I'm just going to say, yeah, you're straight up wrong. Because none of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are bad. The Suicide Squad is great. That's my favorite movie of 2021. Even his first two movies that he did prior to his big kind of superhero blockbuster emergence, Slither and Super, I think are both great little genre pieces in and of their own right.
Scooby-Doo.
And he wrote Scooby-Doo, exactly, which again is another thing from 20 years ago that's kind of having this sort of career retrospective turnaround where everybody that grew up with those movies is going back and being like, yeah, these movies are actually kind of great. Yeah, there's some spotty CG, but for the most part, like, these movies are actually great. And if Gunn had gotten to direct those movies instead of just writing them, like, they have like a lot of great like self-awareness to them. And so my response to Superman is, I'm like, look, even if it's not like what you're expecting, which again, like, well, like at this point, it's like, what is it exactly? Like, that's a problem with comic book fans, is they never exactly know what they want until they actually see the movies and they're like, oh yeah, this is what I wanted, or oh no, this isn't what I wanted, you know? And again, you can't say that the man's not devoted. You can't say that the man doesn't care. You just hear it in the way that he talks about it in every single one of the 1.5 million interviews that he's been doing over the last 2 days or so, where again, his whole big stance has been, again, we're not trying to build towards anything. We're not trying to hype up these big events. We're taking it bit at a time, piece by piece. We're also not necessarily giving you the superheroes that you want or think you're going to get. Our focus is on the scripts and the stories. Those have to be rock solid first and foremost. And that's why you're seeing the projects that are getting greenlit, you know, which are after Creature Commandos and Superman. You have Supergirl, you have Lanterns, and then they also just greenlit Clayface and Dynamic Duo as well. Batman Brave and the Bold, Waller, The Authority, Swamp Thing, Booster Gold, those are all still in the works.
Titans, I think.
Paradise
there's
Lost
a bunch
as well.
of things.
There's a lot of things that they announced, a lot more things that they have announced since then. But my kind of thoughts to it is, because I was also watching another video from another, you know, certain people who I will just say I have classified into the group of complainers. They just like to complain about things. And my whole stance on, you know, the usual thing of, oh, there's too many characters, oh, it's not really, it's a Justice League movie disguised as a Superman movie, yada yada yada. And my whole response to that is, one, we're conditioned to seeing things with a lot of characters in it, so that's not necessarily a complaint when I see that there's going to be a lot more characters than just who's advertised in the poster. Two, Gunn works best when he's with ensemble casts. And three, and this is kind of the thing that I think you really have to come at it from a DC standpoint, is this is the first instance where we're getting the first movie into a new world that is already established. Typically what you have when you have the first movie in the DC, in an extended cinematic universe, Iron Man and Man of Steel, being really the first instance, and yeah, you can make an argument for the 2014 Godzilla as well, is that those movies are always kind of standalone, and the world builds on top of them. Whoever that first hero is in that world, even if there is a history of heroes in that world, they're the ones that kind of get introduced. This is the first instance where we're getting Superman into a world that is already not only populated by a history of heroes, but with other active working heroes, because you see obviously in the trailer, and who was announced before, Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner's Green Lantern, Isabella Merced's Hawkgirl, Edie Gathegy's Mr. Terrific, Anthony Carrigan's Metamorpho, and others as well. And what's interesting, I find, is that Superman, right, was always, even though Superman is the first hero, you had the golden age of superheroes, you know, the Justice Society of America, which focused on heroes like the first Green Lantern and Flash, you know, Wildcat, Sandman, Atom Smasher, you know, certain characters that were introduced in Black Adam and whatnot. And you had that golden age era of heroes before you had the Silver Age Justice League and all of that. And I find that what's interesting is how this is the first time where we're getting Superman in a universe with heroes that are already established. And I think that's kind of interesting and fascinating as far as giving us kind of a new Superman origin that we really haven't seen before, where you see a Superman that not only has to compete and contend with other heroes who may or may not see him as a threat given how powerful and indestructible he is, but also that then may, you know, be forced to, what's the word I'm looking for? Be forced to reckon with him, obviously, when they realize that he is kind of this necessary, crucial, you know, thing that they need on his side. Not to mention the fact that this is another kind of indestructible force in the wake of all these kind of Superman deconstructionism that you've seen in other superhero properties, your Homelanders, your Omni-Mans and whatnots, you know? So the fact, also not to mention the fact that in the real world right now, we need a little bit of positivity. We need somebody to actually aspire to in the year of our Lord 2024, soon to be 2025. Where, again, we're coming out of this era of some real bleak misery. Everybody's miserable. Everybody's divided. We need something to kind of, for lack of a better word, unite us and gravitate towards. And I'm really thinking that this could be it. And again, Gunn is not an idiot. Gunn recognizes that. And he understands that. Again, he's one of the best people when it comes to actually reading what it is that the audience wants and needs. And so if that's going to be the case, if that's the type of movie that we get, full steam ahead. It looks great, I think, too. Like, visually, it looks different than almost any other superhero. Like, they're going for kind of this in-between where they're not going for hyper-realistic, but they're also not going for, like, quite the comic booky look. Like, it's got the bright colors. It's got, like, this comic book edge and aesthetic. I love the way that the Daily Planet looks, but it's not, like, you know, muted and bleak and
It's right
dreary,
in the middle
like
between
Snyder. Yes,
comic book and real. So
exactly.
just blurring that line, Gunn is really good at that. Yeah, I like your point. I was gonna mention it, and then you went on a great tangent about that. The world is already established. Like, the one thing that I quite enjoyed from The Flash was that, you know, the world is established by this point. You know, it's a kind of a failed DCEU, but Wonder Woman can just show up. So in this movie, Hawkgirl, the Green Lantern, Mr. Terrific can just be there because it's already established. So I'm not big on the DC lore. I'm ready to learn about it through these movies. And the thing with, because it is a James Gunn project, there's a certain handful of filmmakers that you just have a trust with, like your Nolans, your Villeneuves, and James Gunn. When it comes to comic book movies, it's like, yeah, whatever you're doing, I'm gonna let you give it to me. I'm probably gonna enjoy it because I've seen everything. Well, I haven't seen everything. I haven't seen before Guardians, but I've seen what you can do, and I'm ready for more. And Superman is, like, when it was announced that he was gonna do Superman, I was like, whoa. That's quite a contrast.
Because you're like, yeah, this is not like anything you've done before. Like, this isn't just some ragtag B-team tier of superheroes that nobody knows that you turn into this, you know, mega beloved band of misfits. This is the guy. This is like the inspiration for every superhero that we've gotten in the last 100 years, you know?
Yeah, I'm, like you said, the hope maxing that people have been throwing around. That's a great term for this movie. You know, my main Superman input has been Man of Steel, so I'm ready to have a different viewpoint, like a hopeful, a more save the cat out of the tree kind of Superman. So, and we're getting a few scenes like that in the trailer already, and he's fighting a giant kaiju, which my understanding is that, like, that's a weekly occurrence in Metropolis.
Yes.
In the comics, compared to like a Gotham where you have psychos running through the streets.
Right.
So
Superpowered psychos, exactly. And
I'm ready to see the contrast of the whole universe. Like, it's we're not just doing the MCU again. The DCU did that. It failed miserably.
Right.
We're
failed
just gonna
horribly.
We're just gonna do kind of random things that that maybe complement in contrast to each other. So and then maybe eventually build to a Justice League type.
Which, again,
project.
if you want to make the argument, that's what DC has always been, and that's always been the thing that separated DC from Marvel. Marvel is this, again, this big combined thing where they're always building up towards these mega events. Everybody kind of always comes together. The X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Avengers were always interchanging members, and then Spider-Man's kind of there. DC, that's not the case. DC, the interest has always been more so in the individual stories where everybody's a little bit more mature, everybody's a little bit more hardened, they're not as codependent on each other, and the individual stories that they have, you know, they go from all over the planet to the deepest regions of outer space and whatnot. And eventually they do come together to deal with these greater existential threats. But for the most part, like you were saying, it's in these contrasting stories that, even though they all occupy the same space, are not the same. They are not all the same characters, you know? They don't all crack similar, have similar styles and senses of humor and whatnot, you know? They have their own individual agendas and things that they're dealing with and such. And I love that, you know? That's always been the thing to me, why DC has always been, for lack of a better word, better than Marvel. I don't necessarily think that one is better than the other, but that's always been the thing that separated that. And like you said, that was the thing that the first attempt at the DCEU missed. And it's part of the reason why, again, they really didn't have any other good movies aside from their random spin-offs that just happen to be good. Because like I said, I made the argument, there are only 3 truly great canon DCEU movies: Man of Steel, Snyder's Justice League, and Gunn's Suicide Squad. That's it. Everything else is kind of just mediocre to mid to really bad, you know? So I agree. And as far as Gunn's stylisms, I said this from the minute that he dropped the teaser. I'm like, oh, he's doing Reeve meets Snyder. Because there's some shots in there that, like, feel directly pulled story-wise from Snyder, but with guns, but with like a Reeve touch to it, you know, where like that's that hope, that optimism. You know, Gunn has talked a lot about his fondness for that 78 Superman and how we really haven't quite gotten a superhero movie quite like that in the almost 50 years since that movie, you know? So all of that is a reason why, again, this isn't my most anticipated movie of next year. That's probably still going to be either Fantastic Four or a Battle of Bactan Cross or F1, but this is definitely up there as far as movies that I'm really looking forward to for next year.
Yeah, this is my number 2 after Mission, maybe the last one.
Yes.
If I could see 2 movies, it would absolutely be those 2. I think F1 is third. When we see Fantastic Four, like a proper look, not just someone filming through their iPhone, they should like delay that movie to Thanksgiving.
Right, yeah, that's the other thing too. I'm glad you brought that up. Fantastic Four is opening up a week or two after Superman. And I'm like, did we not learn anything from when that happened with Mission Impossible and Barbenheimer last year? Like, that's literally the exact thing what happened, where Mission Impossible did pretty well in theaters, but because Oppenheimer and Barbie had secured that release date spot a week after the movie from like 2 years in advance, they had that spot nailed. They had the IMAX theaters that Mission Impossible desperately needed, and yeah, they blew Mission Impossible out of the water. Now, again, yeah, people are excited for and looking forward to Fantastic Four, but compared to Superman, like, and especially after like kind of the shift that you've seen over the last few years between Marvel versus DC, yeah, I think it's safe to say Fantastic Four would be better off delaying to November.
And it's
personally.
Warner Bros. Most viewed trailer ever.
Yes.
In like
but the reason why Marvel's not going to do that is because if they do that, then they're going to have to compete with Wicked, Now You See Me 3, and Zootopia 2, and they do not want to do that after this past year.
I'm not full up to date on the release schedules, but yeah, if they could find somewhere,
yeah,
to slot in,
just drop it the first weekend of November, like they've done in the past. That's worked well for them in the past. It did wonders for them with Ragnarok. It did great for them with Doctor Strange. They haven't opened up a November movie since Eternals, and I think because after Eternals they were scared. But honestly, yeah, I agree with you. They would be much better
and that's
off.
Going to be a big Doomsday movie because like what else is going to be setting up Doomsday?
Exactly, like that's
Captain America, no. Thunderbolts,
no,
not really.
We're getting one other MCU movie supposedly in February of 26 before Doomsday, but we don't know what that's going to be. So yeah, no, I agree. Fantastic Four, I think, would be much better off being moved to November.
Yeah. But I'm excited for both. They both seem
Absolutely.
to be more of a throwback kind of thing.
Yeah. If I had to rank the 4 superhero movies in terms of anticipation, I would say Superman is higher than Fantastic Four, then Thunderbolts, then Brave New World. That's the one I'm looking forward to the least, just because of all the reshoots and everything. So yeah, with all that being said, Luke, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure recapping Lost with you in 2024. I'll see you in 2025. What's it called? When we resume talking Lost, and also I'll have you on for our recap episodes of 2024 that we have. What's it called? You're coming on for the halfway through the decade count top 10, right?
I'm looking forward to that. Just bringing all the blockbusters.
Exactly. Well, if I had to guess, it's more than likely going to be that it's pretty much only going to be blockbusters on everybody's list because there have not been that many great smaller indie movies.
And there have been some great blockbusters.
There have been indeed. So with that being said, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
They should follow me at Luke Reviews on YouTube. I need to watch like 2-3 more movies, and then the top 10 is coming. Everyone go watch Flow as well. Everyone's watching Flow. It's great. Probably can get nominated.
It will get nominated.
Will it lose to The Wild Robot?
It's going to lose to The Wild Robot.
Probably.
I'm sorry.
I am very okay with that.
Yeah, because The Wild Robot's one of the best.
It's probably a better movie. I'll have to watch that as well.
I have a copy of it, so if you want, I can send it to you. It's really good.
I have my ways.
It's really, really good, dude. Like I don't know how anybody could watch that movie and not cry. Like it's that good.
I don't cry at movies, unfortunately. So.
Oh man.
Maybe I'll cry at the end of Lost when it's over.
Well, we will see in 2 years. We got a long ways to go before that happens. But you guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews, at Official Talkin TV Podcast. We'll be back one more time next week. I'll be going live with Nathaniel in order to review Nosferatu and A Complete Unknown, and that will be our goodbye to 2024 before we come back in the new year with our end of the year breakdowns that we always do in January. With that being said, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and get lost. We'll see you guys next year to wrap up season 1.